Hello, YouTubers. Grumpy Old Man here with Smitty. We're going to do another story about this antique saddle we have here. And this is our fourth attempt to start because we were trying to remember when did we get it? When did it come into the... And I thought it was like 1970, but no, we were at a previous residence. But, well, my sister came along in 1965, and I thought... lost track of where and when all of that was because we're counting back so many years. So about 65, you had all your own tack. You had a saddle.
Oh, yes.
And you lost it in a fire.
Yeah.
And we can thank my brother Tim for that fire, and that's another story. So then your dad showed up with a saddle. Yeah. This one. Yeah. Tell us what he told you about it.
Well, he had gone out to a farm site looking for a set of harness that he knew that had been there, and in looking for, searching over the top of the summer kitchen, they had to move this saddle to get in. It was lying there, and they moved it, and they looked for the set of harness and couldn't find it, and then the old lad said, well, maybe it's, yeah, he said, I guess it's gone. And on their way back down out of that kitchen loft, Dad took a second look at this saddle lying there, and he said, is that the saddle? And he said, well, the old lad said, well, my uncle brought that saddle here. He said, we've used it a time or two, but it's laying here for 20-some years now. Never been on a horse since. And
so your dad had been out there years before looking for this pony harness when the uncle was living there.
No, from this old fella.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he'd come back knowing that there was a harness there.
There had been a harness there.
Okay, so it was the same fellow. Okay.
Yeah, so it was a nephew of the fellow that had lived on the farm for years. And this nephew, I gather, had lived there for a number of years. And so my father said to him, I said, well, it's been a long way to come for a set of harness and not find one. He said, what do you want for that old saddle? The fellow said, well, I don't know. Would you give me $20? Father said, no. He said it would take a gallon of oil to souple it up. And
down there is a plastic jug. So while we're telling the story, there's the oil. Not the same jug, but that's mine.
And he said it'd take a lot of work to get it oiled. Couldn't dare use it the way it is. The lad said, what will you give me for it? So my father searched through his pockets and he come up with $12. A $10 bill and some change. And the old fellow said, well, it's not doing any good where it is. I might as well take the 12. My father got that saddle for $12. Yeah.
And then bought a gallon of oil.
Yep, bought a gallon of oil and spent a lot of time oiling it. Yeah. Both sides, top and bottom.
We'll just interrupt. The purpose of the oil is, just like your hands when they get dry and brittle and cracked, same thing happens to the leather. So by getting some oil in a liquid form, you put that on the leather and it'll soak right in. Now if it's brittle and cracked, you're just going to let it sit and absorb that oil. This saddle gets oiled twice a year whether it wants it or not. And today is the start of the spring oiling. So while I'm doing that, you continue with the story.
So anyway, my father said to him, is this the saddle that your uncle brought from the west? Came through the Barnett stable. And the old lad said, yes, as far as I know. He said, we've used it a little bit here, but not much. So my dad went to, Mr. Barnett was still alive that time, and he went to him and he asked him about the history on that saddle, because he knew that one of the Barnett brothers had brought this saddle east with a carload of horses.
Just a little louder.
From their ranch out in Alberta. At that time they had a big ranch out in Alberta, and they were raising horses for the Barnett Lumber Company. And this saddle came with a load of those horses. And the story on the saddle is that there was some chap in a saloon in New Mexico and got into an argument with either the sheriff's son or the mayor's son, and it wound up in a gunfight, and that citizen of that town wound up dead. And this perpetrator, he was immediately invited to be the primary subject of a town hanging, and he declined the offer. And he went out the back door of the saloon and selected a horse that was standing there that looked substantial, and this saddle happened to be on it. And he left town in a hurry, and it wound up that this lad was reported to the authorities, and it wound up that the federal agents kept looking for him, and he worked his way north into Canada, and he wound up working on this Barnett ranch. And when this shipment of horses were heading east, some of his co-workers suggested to him that maybe he'd get rid of the saddle, and the authorities probably wouldn't be quite so interested in him if he didn't have the saddle. So that's how that saddle came to Renfrew.
So what makes this saddle so distinct that in Western Canada it would stand out amongst all the cowboys that were out there?
Oh yes, it's the style. It's a double rig.
Double rig meaning it has a rear cinch on the back and one on the front.
Yeah, and it's designed that a single cinch doesn't keep the saddle on properly. You must use them both. And it was some of them called it a Texas trail saddle when they were trail driving cattle from Texas to Abilene and on the trail drives, because it's designed to do the work that's required for roping cattle or horses. Yeah, and it's unique, and in that it's got a narrow gullet in the front. It's not wide, because in those days their horses weren't big, heavy shouldered. Most of them were heavier hindquartered, and so you needed one that fit on a horse and didn't make him sore, and you had to stay up off his shoulder joint. And it also has a real high cattle board. They call the rear end of that saddle the cattle board. And they don't make them like that anymore.
So most of this saddle is original, but
Yes.
you did some work to it back in the mid to early 70s.
Yeah.
What did you do?
Well, we stripped it all. Took it all apart.
Right down to the tree. Now, as you were doing that, what happened that gave you some concern?
Well, we started to strip it down, and the saddle maker said, not much sense in doing anything to it because this front fork is broke. You can hear it when you once we took the surrounding leather off it, the strapping off it.
And the horn moved a little bit too, didn't it?
Well,
at that point?
Yeah, well, the horn was all that was keeping it together.
Right.
And because that's a metal horn. And
so as he was taking it apart, he had some concern. Things were moving and rattling.
Yeah,
it's broken.
Yeah.
No point going any further.
Well, we wanted to see. I said to him, I said, no. I said, I don't think that fork is broke. Well, he said, there's something wrong. I said, let's find out. So we did. We took it apart, took the horn off, and took the rawhide off. Because that saddle itself is actually in 4 pieces. You've got your front fork, you've got your cattle board, and you've got the 2 side pieces. And what holds them all together is the cattle board and the front fork. And when we took the rawhide off, the saddle makers said, a son of a gun. It wasn't a saddle maker that made this saddle. It was a cabinet maker. That front fork is in 2 pieces. They don't make a saddle with a front fork in 2 pieces. It's not done. But this one is. And it was dovetailed mortise and tenon. And it fit tight. We couldn't even take it apart. It was it
was a snug fit.
It was a snug fit, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Now we did we re-glued it. We put liquid glue into it, hot glue, and re-glued it, and put the horn back on. Then recovered the horn. That's a new cover on the horn. But it's the original plug in that horn.
Yes.
There's a wooden plug in there, and it's the original plug. I didn't take it out. Yeah.
So most of the leather on it is original.
Yeah. We put new rawhide on and put the leather back on. And it's got new saddle strings.
Now the strings, they go right through the saddle,
And they
right through to the other side, and they tie everything together.
Yeah. They hold the fleece on and the skirting on the bars.
And you'll see one here, 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 and here. Same thing on this side. There is a screw here and some nails across, but that piece is held in place here and here by the lace is going through all the way through. And then the original front cinch was rotted pretty bad, so he replaced that and moved it to the back. And then about 22 years ago, he came to me and asked me to replace the rear cinch. So I put some leather together. That's the original hardware from that cinch. I just used it and took the fabric. It was canvas, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
So I replaced the canvas with leather, following the same pattern that was on it, and just rebuilt it using leather. And that became the rear cinch. And then we use a modern.
Oh yeah, you've got it. Your cinches are vital.
They get replaced regularly because over time they break down.
Yeah.
But that one's been on it for, well, 15 years?
Yeah.
If that,
Yeah.
who knows?
Yeah.
Because it gets replaced regularly.
Yeah.
Whereas,
wash it and clean it, and
Right.
take the sweat out of it.
now the stirrups
It
down
does.
below, we'll talk about them. Oh, and we'll come back to the stirrup straps. So the stirrup is actually a wooden stirrup with a bit of suede tied on the bottom.
Yeah.
We don't use them when we're riding. We actually replace them with some leather stirrups that I made 22 years ago.
Yeah.
These ones, Dad has kept them, but I just put them on the saddle for the purpose of showing the original pieces. But the stirrup strap itself doesn't have any hardware to adjust. Right here, you can see some holes and a bunch of lace. And you undo the lacing. And there's a fair amount of it. And the lacing goes through 4 holes. You have to undo the lacing and adjust it. It takes
20 minutes.
20 minutes to do a side, or get the saddle on. And Dad and I ride with the stirrups at different lengths. So anytime we're sharing a ride, we don't usually share the saddle. Simply because it's going to take 20 minutes just to adjust. His legs are just a little shorter than mine. And how many miles do you figure you put on horses with this saddle?
Oh,
You've done a 5-day ride, 100 miles in the 5 days,
21 times.
21 times. We posted earlier about your ride to Pembroke and back. That's 230 miles plus the back roads. So maybe
That's probably 250.
yeah.
Yeah.
You've had the saddle since
And I've done multiple rides.
a lifetime of riding on it.
Oh, yes.
So
it's-
it doesn't get much use now. The seat is
I
just
guess there may be 5,000 miles on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yourself.
Myself, yeah.
Yeah.
Myself, yeah.
Who knows? There was a couple of thousand miles on it before it came to Canada.
Yeah. Oh, yes. This saddle has had a lot of use. Yeah. It would come out of New Mexico.
And one of the excellent features that you've discovered with this saddle is it's never sored a horse.
Never soared a horse. I've had it on a horse for 8 hours. 8 hours straight. I cinched it up. When I put it on the horse, I snugged it up. I rode for 20 minutes, and then snugged it up again, and never had to slack it off for 8 hours. And when I took it off that horse, he wasn't sore. There was no dry spot on him any place. Yeah. And I've had it on ponies, and I've had it on draft horses, and it fit them all.
So when we tried to date this saddle, what efforts did you go through to find out where it's from, what's the name, and
I was
the
lucky
era?
enough. I picked up a information sheet from Textan, I think it was.
Textan, the saddle manufacturer.
Well, they were, they were leather sales magazine.
Yep.
And there was an article in it on. They had done some research on the history of the American Western saddle.
Now, Textan or Western Horseman magazine?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I didn't pick it up on newsstands. Somebody gave it to me.
Okay.
They were, but they did the history of the saddles that came from Spain when they brought the Spanish horses over to Central America, Florida and Central America, and the changes in the style of them, for the changes of the use of them. Originally, they did not, when they roped the cattle, they did not tie it to the saddle. Originally. It was only once the Americans, even yet in South America, they don't tie to the saddle when they rope cattle. And Australia, they don't tie to the saddle. It was only in America that they tied hard and fast. And the changes in over the years, and this particular model was advertised as the model then in about 1872, they said. Now, on this particular saddle, except for the straps that hold those stirrups, those fenders are original.
The fender is
That's the part that protects your leg. The underside protects your leg.
Yes, and the skirting on the side is the original.
Oh yes.
And on the back, that pattern that's on there, God knows how you would reproduce that.
I've no idea. Yeah. Yeah. And originally it was on the stirrup straps on each side, on the originals.
So yeah,
that's basically that's how I know when I look at it what has been replaced on it.
yes, because that pattern was all over.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's up across here.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of history on a saddle that's been in the family for a while.
Yeah.
And your dad wrote out the history to it, and we're looking for that actual document. You might have a copy of it. I put it on a computer.
I know I've got a copy of it. Yeah.
Years ago, but that computer is dead, and so are several generations of it.
Yeah.
So I doubt it could even read the disc. So we're going to try and hunt that down, and we'll see if we can add that to the story. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions about the saddle, or any of Smitty's stories, or Grumpy Old Man stuff, just post them, and we'll get back to you right away. Well, thank you very much for watching.